The streets of Tehran are burning. From the northern wealthy districts to the working-class neighborhoods of the south, a familiar chant is rising above the smoke and the tear gas. But this time, the unrest on the streets is being met with a terrifying counter-narrative from the halls of power. As the Islamic Republic faces one of the most severe internal challenges in its 45-year history, the regime has chosen to look outward, not with diplomacy, but with a loaded gun pointed directly at the United States. Following a stark warning from Donald Trump regarding the safety of American personnel, the Iranian regime has escalated the rhetoric to a fever pitch, declaring United States forces in the region as legitimate targets. Welcome to One Day Ago and Now. Today, we are not just looking at a protest or a diplomatic spat. We are analyzing a potential flashpoint for a global conflict. We are dissecting a critical report regarding the spreading protests across Iran and the regime's subsequent threat against American forces. We are here to separate the signal from the noise, to look at the capabilities, the intentions, and the terrifying variables that could turn the Persian Gulf into a war zone. We will analyze why a regime, seemingly cornered by its own people, would threaten the world's greatest military power. Is this the desperate lashing out of a dying system, or is it a calculated geopolitical gamble designed to unify a fractured nation against a foreign enemy? The question we must answer today is simple but chilling. Is the Islamic Republic of Iran preparing for its final stand, or is it setting the stage for a war that could engulf the entire Middle East? To understand the gravity of declaring U.S. forces as legitimate targets, we must first step back and survey the historical and geographical landscape that has brought us to this precipice. The relationship between Washington and Tehran has been defined by hostility since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, an event that transformed a strategic Western ally into a theological adversary. For decades, this conflict was fought in the shadows. It was a war of spies, of cyber attacks, and of proxies. Iran perfected the art of asymmetric warfare, using groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen to project power without engaging in direct state-on-state conflict. We must understand the dual nature of the Iranian state to grasp the current crisis. You have the elected government, which handles day-to-day administration, and then you have the supreme leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. The IRGC is not just a military force, it is an industrial conglomerate, a political power broker, and the ideological guardian of the revolution. It is the IRGC that creates the ballistic missiles, and it is the IRGC that is currently crushing the protests. The ideology of the state is built on the concept of Vilayat-e Faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which grants absolute authority to the supreme leader. This system relies heavily on the narrative of resistance against the West, specifically the United States, which they refer to as the Great Satan. Geographically, Iran holds the keys to the global energy supply. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which a significant percentage of the world's oil passes, is effectively Iran's kill switch. Any conflict here is not just a regional skirmish, it is a global economic catastrophe. But the internal dynamics of Iran are just as critical as its geography. The context of the current situation is framed by the shadow of the past, specifically the maximum pressure campaign and the targeted strike that killed General Qasem Soleimani. That event shattered the unspoken rule that senior Iranian officials were untouchable. The memory of that strike looms large over the current leadership. When warnings are issued regarding the safety of former or current U.S. officials, the regime listens. They know that the threat of overwhelming force is not theoretical. However, the internal pressure cooker is what makes this moment unique. The Iranian economy is in freefall. Sanctions, corruption, and mismanagement have decimated the rial. The protests we are seeing now are driven by a potent mix of economic desperation and a desire for social freedom. This places the regime in a classic dictator's trap. They need to show strength to survive, but using force against their own people erodes their legitimacy. The recent report from Fox News highlights that protests are spreading not just in the capital, but across the provinces. When steelworkers, teachers, and pensioners unite on the streets, the regime gets nervous. And a nervous regime is a dangerous regime. Let us move into a deep analysis of the current escalation. The declaration that U.S. forces are legitimate targets is a significant shift in legal and military posturing. In the past, Iran often maintained a veil of plausible deniability. If a militia in Iraq fired a rocket at a U.S. base, Tehran would shrug and claim they had no control over local actors. By explicitly stating that U.S. forces are targets, the regime is effectively removing that buffer. They are signaling that the gloves are off. From a military perspective, we must analyze what this threat actually entails. Iran possesses the largest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. They have developed sophisticated drone technology, which has been battle-tested on the fields of Ukraine by their Russian allies. A direct attack on U.S. forces would likely not come in the form of a conventional invasion, but through a saturation strike. This involves swarms of drones and missiles designed to overwhelm American air defense systems like the Patriot or the Aegis. The IRGC knows they cannot win a conventional war against the United States Navy or Air Force. Therefore, their strategy is one of cost imposition. They want to make the American presence in the Middle East so costly in terms of blood and treasure that the US public demands a withdrawal. However, we must also analyze this from a political survival standpoint. Why escalate now? Why poke the bear when your own house is on fire? There is a school of thought in political science known as diversionary war theory. When a leader faces domestic unrest, they manufacture a foreign crisis to rally the population around the flag. The Iranian leadership is attempting to paint the protesters not as concerned citizens, but as agents of the United States and Israel. By threatening the US, they are trying to validate their own narrative, that the nation is under attack from without, necessitating a crackdown within. Yet, there is a flaw in this logic. The protesters on the streets of Tehran, Shiraz, and Isfahan are chanting slogans against the regime's foreign adventurism. They are shouting slogans that indicate they care more about the price of bread in Tehran than the influence of the regime in Lebanon or Gaza. The old playbook of blaming the foreigner is losing its potency. This makes the regime even more dangerous. If the propaganda does not work, they may feel compelled to initiate an actual kinetic conflict to enforce martial law and silence dissent under the guise of wartime necessity. We must also consider the intelligence dimension regarding the specific warning from Donald Trump mentioned in the reports. In the world of high-stakes geopolitics, public warnings are often the tip of the iceberg. They suggest that intelligence agencies have picked up on specific threats. This could be the movement of missile launchers, intercepted chatter between commanders, or the activation of sleeper cells. The U.S. intelligence community has a robust history of monitoring IRGC communications. If a warning is being issued, it is likely because the threat matrix is flashing red. This creates a volatile feedback loop. The U.S. increases its force posture to deter an attack. Iran interprets this reinforcement as preparation for an invasion and escalates further. Let us expand our lens to the economic aspect. The Iranian currency has lost significant value, and inflation is rampant. The regime relies on oil exports, primarily to China, to fund its security apparatus. By threatening U.S. forces, Iran is also threatening the security of the Persian Gulf shipping lanes. This is a double-edged sword. While a spike in oil prices might help Iran's revenue in the short term, physically closing the Strait of Hormuz or attacking tankers would alienate China, their only major economic lifeline. Beijing has no interest in a global energy crisis. This suggests that while the rhetoric is hot, the regime might be constrained by its economic dependence on Asian markets. Now, we need to evaluate the impact and potential scenarios. The stakeholders here are not just Washington and Tehran. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel are watching closely. The Gulf states are terrified of being caught in the crossfire. They have been pursuing a policy of de-escalation with Iran recently, but this new threat blows that diplomatic bridge apart. Israel, on the other hand, views a nuclear-armed, aggressive Iran as an existential threat. If U.S. forces are attacked, Israel may seize the opportunity to launch its own strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, operating under the umbrella of American chaos. Let us map out 3 potential scenarios for the near future. Scenario 1. Iran directs a proxy group to conduct a lethal strike on a U.S. base in Syria or Iraq, resulting in American casualties. The U.S. responds with heavy airstrikes against IRGC command centers within Iran itself, crossing a red line that has existed for years. This leads to Iranian missile retaliation against U.S. bases in the Gulf. We enter a period of sustained, high-intensity conflict that falls short of invasion but devastates regional infrastructure and sends oil prices skyrocketing. Scenario 2 is internal collapse. The regime, distracted by its standoff with the U.S., fails to contain the domestic protests. The security forces, stretched thin and demoralized, begin to defect. The threat against the U.S. turns out to be a bluff that is called, shattering the regime's image of strength. The government collapses not from an American bomb, but from the weight of its own incompetence and the fury of its citizens. This leads to a chaotic power vacuum, potentially turning Iran into a failed state with loose weaponry. Scenario 3 is the calculated standoff. This is perhaps the most likely. The regime continues its bellicose rhetoric and conducts cyber attacks or harassment of shipping but stops short of killing U.S. personnel. They use the external tension to justify harsh martial law at home, crushing the protests while avoiding a war they know they will lose. It is a high-wire act of brinkmanship where one miscalculation sends everyone over the edge. We must also analyze the technological dimension of this standoff. The modern battlefield is transparent. Satellites, both commercial and military, watch every movement. If Iran prepares a ballistic missile launch, the world knows before the fuel trucks have finished pumping. This transparency removes the element of surprise for a large-scale attack. However, it increases the risk of the use-it-or-lose-it mentality. If Iranian commanders believe the U.S. has detected their preparations and is about to strike preemptively, they may launch in a panic. This hair-trigger environment is arguably the most dangerous aspect of the current crisis. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the cyber domain. Before a single missile flies, the war will likely begin online. Iran has invested heavily in cyber capabilities. A legitimate target might not just mean a soldier in a barracks, it could mean the power grid of a US base, the financial systems of American allies, or the water treatment plants of regional partners. This is the gray zone of warfare where the lines between peace and conflict are blurred. Comparing this to historical precedents, we can look at the lead-up to the 1979 revolution itself. The Shah of Iran possessed the fifth largest army in the world. He had absolute power and the backing of the West. Yet, when the streets turned against him, his military power meant nothing. The current supreme leader was a revolutionary himself. He knows this history better than anyone. His threat against the US is a gamble that fear of foreign war will trump the anger over domestic hunger. But unlike in 1980, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran and unified the country, today the Iranian people have access to information. They know their enemy is not the American soldier stationed in Bahrain, but the corrupt official stealing their pension in Tehran. The implications for the United States are profound. The US military is currently pivoting towards the Indo-Pacific to counter China. Being dragged back into a major Middle Eastern ground war is strategically undesirable for the Pentagon. However, the US cannot afford to look weak. Deterrence relies on credibility. If Iran threatens US troops and the US does nothing, it emboldens adversaries from Moscow to Beijing. Therefore, the US response to any provocation must be disproportionate, which risks the very escalation they seek to avoid. In conclusion, the situation unfolding in Iran is a convergence of three volatile timelines: the timeline of domestic economic collapse, the timeline of the regime's crisis of legitimacy, and the timeline of renewed confrontation with the United States. The declaration that US forces are legitimate targets is not mere bluster, it is a strategic authorization for that changes the rules of engagement in the Middle East. We are witnessing a high-stakes poker game where the chips are human lives and the stability of the global economy. The Iranian regime is betting that the United States is too weary, too divided, and too focused on other theaters to respond with overwhelming force. They are betting that they can use the specter of war to frighten their own population into submission. But history teaches us that when regimes begin to construct foreign monsters to slay, they often end up being devoured by the very chaos they unleashed. The importance of this topic cannot be overstated. A conflict in the Persian Gulf affects the price of the gas in your car, the cost of the goods on your shelves, and the security of the world your children will inherit. If the deterrence fails, we are looking at a conflict that will make the previous wars in the Middle East look like minor skirmishes. The West needs to wake up to the reality that a containment strategy may no longer be viable against a regime that feels it has nothing left to lose. We need robust intelligence, unified diplomatic pressure, and a military posture that is ready for the worst-case scenario. We at one day ago and now believe that understanding these complex mechanisms is the key to predicting the future. We do not deal in panic, we deal in reality, however stark that reality may be. We need you to think about what happens next. If the regime falls, who picks up the pieces? If the war starts, how does it end? I encourage you to take a moment and reflect on the information presented. Discuss this in the comments below. Do you think the Iranian regime is bluffing? Do you believe the protests will lead to a revolution, or will they be crushed as they have been before? Share your thoughts, but keep the debate civil and focused on the facts. If you value deep dive analysis that refuses to follow the shallow currents of the 24-hour news cycle, then you are in the right place. We are building a community of critical thinkers here. Make sure you are subscribed to One Day Ago and Now and have your notifications turned on. The geopolitical landscape is shifting under our feet every single day, and we will be here to chart it with you. Thank you for watching, and stay vigilant.